event has actually, to me, taken on a different life and been so enriching in ways I never imagined. And just this morning, I have to say, listening to people from Canada and listening about farming, in a minute you'll understand why. I mean, the connections are they're just incredible, and thank you so much. So, good morning. My name is Emily Conant Young, and is this about right? Down? Okay, is that better? Okay, so good morning. My name is Emily Conant Young, and we'll get back to my name in a minute. You should be aware there are very few stories in my family, and of the few there are, my brother and I don't agree about them. So I've decided to only share a couple and not tell him, but in general, stories are out of this. So I am a first-generation American on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I was told we come from Pilgrim stock. My roots are in the soil, literally, on my father's side. He was raised on a farm on the banks of Lake Ontario in Canada. My father never talked about his childhood or any aspect of his life before we were born. What my brother and I know of my dad is through the lens of our mother, what she said, except for one story. My dad and his two brothers were raised on a farm in Bath, Ontario. The family was dirt poor. And my dad, and this is from him, thinking anything was better than making a living in the dirt. It's always stuck with me for some reason, and not comfortably always. Somehow made it to Queen's Medical College in Kingston, Ontario, and immigrated to the United States sometime before World War II. He lived and worked as a psychiatrist on the grounds of the New York State Mental Institution in Binghamton, New York. That's where he met my mother. That's where they married. That's where my brother and I were raised, on the grounds of a state mental institution. My dad had profound respect for the United States and became a US citizen, but his Canadian roots and reverence for the British Crown and the Commonwealth never left him. I remember Dad and Mom traveling to the opening and dedication of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959 so Dad could see the Queen. He wanted to see Queen Elizabeth II. It's funny, but I have never thought of myself as the child of an immigrant till this. It's interesting. Rather, the storyline dominating my childhood was that of my mother's family. And as the story goes, the Conants, that's my middle name, my mother's maiden name, were among the second boat of pilgrims. And Roger Conant, from whom we are descended, was the first governor of Massachusetts. I visualized this boat being anchored offshore and waiting for a lantern signal from the Mayflower, which landed in the Provincetown harbor. But it never made sense, since there were no Conants on the Mayflower survivors, and in school we were taught that John Carver was the first governor. So and I was raised in New York, so we may have had it all wrong anyway. But anyway, so decades later, I learned that there was a second boatload of English settlers, and they arrived in 1623 to help support the Pilgrims who were in Plymouth Colony. And Roger Conant was among them, along with his wife Sarah and an infant son. The story goes that Roger found the Pilgrims too strict, and so in 1624 he moved his family to Nantasket, now the town of Hull, which is located about 15 miles south of Boston on a peninsula jutting into the Massachusetts Bay. And within a year, he moved his family to the northernmost point of the Massachusetts Bay, to Cape Ann. And there he became governor of the Dorchester Company Trading and Fishing Settlement. It was this small group up there. But when it became a commercial failure, those living in the settlement had three options. They could go to Virginia, They could go home, or they could strike out somewhere else. And Roger and his family and a small band of his neighbors went south to Salem, which he is credited with founding. And those of you who've been there can see the Roger Conant statue, I'm sure, dominating the town square. Roger Conant is referred to as the first governor of Massachusetts by some because he led the Salem settlement before the Massachusetts Bay Colony was chartered. But when the king granted the charter, a new governor came from England. Roger relinquished his title, his role, quietly after being given 200 acres of land, and he moved his family away. He died in Peabody and is credited with founding not only Salem, but also Peabody, Essex, and Danvers. So it's a huge part of the North Shore. So I'm related to Roger Conant through his son Lot, his fourth child, who was born in Cape Ann. And thus Lot was the first generation of New England colonists. Lot and 4 generations of his descendants remained in the Salem-Peabody area. Then another 2 generations somehow wound up in Temple, Maine, and who knows why. And then their next generation leapfrogged over to Schenectady, Amsterdam area, who knows why. And there, my grandfather was born, Dr. James B. Conant, not related to the James B. Conant of, public education land. And that's where my grandfather was born and lived until his death. And he and my grandmother had 6 kids. My mother was the eldest daughter. So that's the long and the short of it. I am a 10th generation Conant, related to Roger Conant through my mother. Now I have to say, I was raised to think this was pretty big stuff. Pretty big. I'm just glad at this point in my life to say that the Conants had no relationship to the Salem witch trials in the early 1690s. Roger had died before that, and any Conant descendants may have been in the Salem area at the time, but currently there are no documented accounts of them being accusers, accused, or jurors. There are also no accounts of Roger or his descendants being enslavers. But I'm bracing for the day when such documentation is discovered. Historians are learning that enslavement existed in the 1600s and 1700s in New England, and it included the leadership, the governors, and the clergy. Roger Conant was not poor, and he was a leader. It's also well known what the relationships are between the Conants and the indigenous peoples they encountered. The North Shore was home to the Pawtucket, the Massachusetts, the Nipmuc, the Pennatuk, the Mapanoag tribes, and with the Massachusetts also in the Hull area. No discussion of that ever in my family. In contrast to the Conants, we don't know anything about my father's ancestors. We know they arrived in the United States, but we don't know when. We can trace the Young line back only to 1864, when my father's father was born in Ontario, Canada. And there is some evidence that the Youngs, who were of German descent, were living in Pennsylvania. And according to family lore, they were loyalists. But we do not know whether they emigrated before, during, or after the American Revolution. We just don't know. So that's my family history as we understand it today. So how in the world did I wind up here in South Hadley and don't talk about being a Conant? Well, my mom went to Mount Holyoke College. Her parents believed in education for all their children, not just their sons. So my mother and her 2 sisters all went to private colleges and up for undergraduate and graduate degrees. And this was during the late 1920s and 1930s. It was unusual for women at that time to study beyond high school, and even more unusual given the Depression. So I went to Mount Holyoke as well, And I came to love New England and this area. And 17 years later, after I graduated, I met my partner, Kathy Sharkey, who was living in South Hadley and also a Mount Holyoke alum. And since then, regardless of where we have lived, we have owned a condo in the town to which we could return on weekends or vacations. And in 2014, we actually became South Hadley residents. I feel like getting citizenship or something this time. So as I look back on my heritage, I have to say I cannot imagine living over 400 years ago. I would have died, as so many did. And thus I would not have helped in the formative stages of our nation as Roger Conan and his family did. Nor can I imagine being raised on a farm. Although I loved our summer visits to my Uncle Gerald, my father's younger brother, some of my fondest childhood memories are sitting on my uncle's lap on his tractor. I don't think I can get through this right now. As he mowed and baled the hay. I can still smell it. I can still see the seat of that tractor, what he sat on. And I was so proud when Uncle Gerald trusted me enough to let me get the cattle and drive them to the barn to be milked. That was a coming of age on the farm. My mother disliked all of this. She disliked my uncles and their farms. She made sure my brother and I were exposed to music and the arts and pushed the public school system to provide more advanced and a broader range of courses, to not let us settle for Binghamton, and to provide or to settle for the childhood that my father had lived. And so I chafed. By the time I figured this all out, and I'm not sure I've even figured it all out, by the time I was a teenager, I chafed at my teenage world, and Mount Holyoke became my exit ramp. Having my parents who were educated, they were comfortable, but they weren't wealthy, who provided a stable two-parent household, who guided their children to adulthood, that was a gift, an unbelievable gift that I only now appreciate. I was very, very lucky. And I'm very thankful to be living at a time and in a country where heated buildings, hot water, electric lights, clean water, sanitation are taken for granted, as are antibiotics, hospitals, doctors, good public education, and an abundance of food. A country where the form of government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. A country where the rights of the individual are guaranteed, the rights of the minority are protected, and the rule of law prevails. My hope for the future is a society where these fundamental principles endure, and they are overlaid with harmony, compassion, and belief in the common good, all essential for a just and peaceful world. Thank you.